Good morning, Kison. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, Ryan. How about yourself?
Doing good. I'm pumped to have you on the show, especially because we got introduced by a good friend, Dan Golden. So even though you and I are professionals and we are going to talk about some very sophisticated, complicated stuff, we both know that we have a little bit of 2-year-olds in us because of the mutual friend that introduced us and his sense of humor.
This is probably the best way to get introduced is through Dan.
I'm like, okay, so we're going to talk about some cool stuff, but you know Dan. So we'll save some of those shenanigans for offline. So, which I think it's going to set the stage, I think, for the episode, Kison, because, I talk about mergers and acquisitions and value growth and all this stuff with businesses all day long, and so do you. But I think what I enjoyed about our conversation when we first met was we don't have to make it that complicated. And you just came out with a book explaining how to take something that's super complicated and where a lot of things can go wrong, and then broken it down into a framework that makes sense. So I think the listeners are going to enjoy this topic as we kind of get into it. But maybe for the listeners that are not familiar with you, your background, give us a little bit of a Cliff Note version of where did you come from, how did you get into the world of M&A, and then what are you doing now, and what is the premise of your book, and then we'll take some time unpacking it.
Sure. So my background, I ran a boutique M&A advisory practice here in Chicago for 10 years. I primarily worked on hotels and small financial institutions on both the buy and sell side. And it was in that experience where I got exposed to a lot of the inefficiencies in the M&A process and had to endure the recession around 2007 and mulled through that, but took that as the time to get involved in the technology space. And around 2012, in that period, I saw this trend where all these different industries were adopting project management tools, the construction space, education, and started a company in 2012 called DealRoom with the pretty simple thesis that the billion-dollar M&A deals wouldn't be managed in Excel forever. So that business started. And in that experience is when I started working with a variety of different investment banks and corporate development teams and realized that there is no standardized or evidence-based approach to completing M&A deals. Everybody has their own unique way of doing deals, and oftentimes it's nothing that's really proven, which got me thinking about what are these best practices that companies can be utilizing. And also, I saw things that our software engineers would use when they use their project management techniques, their agile approaches in developing software that I thought would help overcome some of the same challenges in the M&A space. So it was around 3 years ago where I started blogging about that. And then more recently, about a year or so ago, I had interviews with some large tech companies like Google and Atlassian, where they expressed the details and how they were actually using agile techniques in their M&A process that stemmed from their engineering culture with great success. And that gave me the validation to really start putting this stuff together into a framework and published a book out of it to hopefully help other companies be able to evolve their M&A process.
I love it. So, what I think we should do, and I'm wide open to ebb and flow in the conversation, but I think let's tell a couple stories on like the problem, right? So the problem that you're solving, and then we can talk about your process, and we can talk about some stories, and then what Agile is, and then how you've been using it to integrate. But like maybe I'll just start off with one of my stories, and then a couple of the ones that I've seen recently. Kison, is that yeah, I actually, in one of my certifications that I got, this financier was explaining that a lot of, the whole point of buying a company from a buyer's perspective is to get a rate of return, period. Right? I mean, like obviously there's strategic reasons and then there's all these different things, but the point of taking money and paying for an asset is to get a rate of return. And what happens is the stat that I heard, and I'm curious if this is in your book or in any of your data, is that most acquisitions do not get a return above their cost of capital for essentially borrowing or any other investment, because it flops because of the integration, which is some of the stuff that you're talking about. And I think about when we sold, we had 30 people that showed up, and like we had no phones, there was no org chart. I mean, there's like 30 highly paid people just walking around going, what should we do? And like that actually ended up going fairly well because it was the same industry, same systems, and there was a lot of, it didn't take as long to get integrated as I think some other stories where I hear story after story, Kison, of these private equity firms these days where you have a bunch of Wall Street guys or gals who have this awesome investment thesis of I'm going to roll up X industry across the U.S. I mean, my God, I've heard that story so many times, and then I've heard this one recently where this PE firm bought 17 companies in like 20 months. So you have thousands of employees, and the thing's a total disaster because I'm like, how do you integrate that many ERP systems or payroll systems? Let alone if all the systems went fine. Can you imagine integrating like 18 cultures? so like
Yeah.
then therefore the financial reward doesn't go there too. So hopefully maybe that sets some foundation to explain, like when you said that when you were working in the investment banking space of the buy and sell side and you saw the inefficiencies. What are some of the things that were blaringly obvious that, I mean, you've been working on this now for over 10 years, right? So like what were some of the things that you saw that were like blaringly obvious?
Well, we're talking about a lot of different angles here, which is great. There's the buy side and the private equity, and on the banking side, oftentimes you're representing sellers, and there's also a level of inefficiencies there. And just diving a little deeper in that area, it's when you're managing the sell side process. What happens is you're working with a company that's selling their management team, and you're entertaining buyers through that process. And good buyers are sophisticated, are going to come in and they're going to do their diligence. And if you're working with even larger companies that are going to have more people involved than maybe that are responding to some of their diligence inquiries. So it gets challenging to manage that. And a lot of times companies still do that with Excel, send a bunch of emails back and forth, and then put a bunch of data in a data room. That tends to be a pretty clunky process. And what happens is it's the management teams ends up scrambling around to respond to all this stuff. And it becomes a whole nother job for them that ends up distracting them away from their business. And next thing you know, they're not meeting those quarterly goals and it's making a financial impact on the company, which even worst case could be terms to renegotiate the deal because the value has not been portrayed in the growth level they expected.
I was gonna say, like, maybe give like an example. Like, so you have, let's say you got a company, you got three people. Explain like what the old antiquated process would be like. I mean, is it like, by the way, Keyson, here's a list of stuff that I need, and here's a Dropbox folder, and then like maybe just give a little bit of color behind that situation you just brought up.
Yeah. So here's we're selling a company. We're going to start off the process with this giant list of 100 things that we're going to need just to start prepping the marketing material to take the company out to market, which is fine. I mean, some of that you're not compressed on time because you could take a week or you can take a month to put all that stuff together. And it's pretty tedious. You got to just follow the Excel sheet, put in a folder structure, put an index number, and go back and forth. So pretty manual, but you can get at leisure. What happens is during the further along the process, and we got Joe, the CFO, and Steve, the treasurer, who are putting all together this financial information. As they start getting buyers in and they're doing more diligence, you're going to have to start answering these requests, and they keep coming in. And they could be batches because on the buy side, if I'm a large organization, we'll take Walmart as whatever company, right? And they're going to have their different functional leads coming in, and they're going to be their different functional leads from HR, legal. They're going to have their own diligence questions and their own list. So a lot of times, these lists get compiled and they get sent over to that buyer, the representative of the buyer, and then that management team has to answer them. Now, if you're imagining running a competitive process with 5 different competing bidders for this, and they're each sending you 300 questions. Next thing you know, you got 500 questions and requests for information that you're responding to. I don't know if I did the math right. It's like 1,500, but so you know what I mean.
It's a lot.
Yeah, you're maximizing yourself out, and it becomes a very stressful process. Then once you start getting further along, and you're familiar with this, when you sign your letter of intent, and then it even gets intense because now you're doing confirmatory diligence, which everybody's really doubling down to make sure things are what they need to be. They're identifying the risk in the transactions. And that's when you're getting a lot of intense response, and there's an expectation that the stuff gets responded to in a timely fashion to keep the process going. That's where you see a lot of this pressure that happens for that management team and why it becomes such a big distraction for them.
Well, and yeah, I mean, just in the bigger the company, the more locations, the more I mean, like the more divisions, the more questions, and they're asking everything. It's funny when I've told people about this that haven't sold, I'm like, no, 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 it's literally everything. Like there's not like, oh, we forgot this document. I mean, because everything, everything that you don't have and like how long it takes, I think it has a direct correlation to the trust. I just did a podcast episode on trust, as it relates to buying and selling and the people, and like it just erodes that, which just erodes the price.
Ah, yeah.
So, like when you were going through this, Kison, and you started realizing how inefficient this was. So, what are the different things that you started seeing? Like you said, you started seeing people come up with project management tools, and like what was where did your kind of like passion behind this start? I mean, was it like, okay, this is just inefficient, I need to fix it, or did you started coming at it from like like maybe explain your evolution to the agile system in the book that you brought that you just wrote?
It probably started off just being a nerd, Ryan, where I always like nerded out on the tech pieces of the company, building the website and things like that. And when I didn't find good solutions for our firm, I started building our own tools in house. And I remember building our own virtual data room back in 2005, just because the vendors out there were charging an enormous amount and they're billing for every single page of document that you upload in their system. So I just started originally starting with the FTP site, then evolved that into a data room. And then, so some of those ideas were seeded from that experience. And then it evolved with this idea of developing it into project management software and taking that to market. And then from there, it's just, you go through a lot of iterations. I think we all like building anything, it's going to take longer and cost more than we expect. So there's that learning curve, especially when it came to technology. Building an in-house tool versus building something to take to market is two totally different things. It probably took us maybe 2-3 years to really figure out how security works and dial that in so that we can handle transaction for larger firms.
So when you look at like the old way of the spreadsheets and doing getting all these people involved, I mean, because I mean, can't remember. There was a woman that I was just talking to. She spent almost $500,000 on her sale and advisors, right? So if you just have one sale, you've got all your advisors in this deal room that are getting their fingers in and out of the information. Then you've got maybe 5, maybe more buyers, and then all of their advisors. I mean, it blows up fast. So how do you take, like, how did you, like, what should the process look like, I guess, is my question. And then walk us through the whole process from from the prepping to the actual close, and like how you can coordinate some of that stuff based on your guys' philosophy.
Sure. So I think a lot of this stuff, like the way we laid it out, the thing that I see a big lack of is a real definition of what an operating framework is, because we just go pursue an M&A deal and we don't have a formal project management methodology in place. And that's where a lot of these friction points happen. So thinking of that early on is probably one of the first and foremost things to do, which is, in the book I wrote, is focused on introducing a project management framework that really emphasizes responsiveness, collaboration, and continuous improvement. And that's like the real root of it. But when we look at the process itself, when it starts off, we don't have a lot going on, right? You got two people that get together, wherever it is, first class on a jet, and they make a deal. And when they make the deal, then things start coming together. You got the handshake deal, and you start going through your series of diligence. And as you go through your diligence process, you're going to have more and more people involved in that process. And then as you keep continuing through that, more and more people get involved. That's when you really need to be able to coordinate the people together and make sure you have a good flow of sharing that information, particularly when information is very confidential. And then as you go through this, the goal of diligence is for the buyer to be able to identify the risk in transactions. And you got to have a team doing that, that's collectively looking at the company and sharing their views, so that they're able to connect the dots and identify the underlying risks. Otherwise, you have people work independently and they're going down checklists looking for the obvious doomsday tomorrow type of risk. And then as well, they could discover opportunities in the company as well while they're doing their diligence. And then for them at the same time, you want to be able to plan what are you going to do with this company after you close? What are the post close value creation model? What are we going to do for integration and how are we going to ensure that goes smooth? And that's really, really important. I think that's one of the big fail points I've seen. And probably
Mm-hmm.
it's more recently in the few years, you're seeing companies wise up to it. In the corporate environment, you're seeing less of a disconnect where traditionally there's two separate teams, a corp dev team that runs a process from sourcing through close and a separate team that runs a process from close through the integration stage. And now we're seeing that really converge together and become one team or somehow create that true partnership between those teams so that the integration lead can be involved as early as possible. And there's a lot of value they can create because they can actually help validate the value drivers of the deal, which is another issue is a lot of times deals are done with the prediction of what's going to drive the value for paying the amount of the deal that they're going to do it on. And then we see that big M&A failure rate that's always 70%, 80%, depending on which big four report you're looking at. And that's what ends up happening. Companies just don't hit those target numbers. So for them to look at how can they miss those target numbers, but that person that's actually responsible for delivering it should be involved early enough to really help validate it,
Right.
right?
It's just ridiculous, isn't it? It'd be like
Yeah, because
someone
that's
it'd be like someone going out and trying to pick a date for you and then handing him off to you without you having any
and then telling you got to make it work.
yeah, like it's like an arranged marriage. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, so which I mean, when you really think about it, how ridiculous it sounds, because internally, I mean, you're trying to find out the systems, the people, the processes, the clients, and all this stuff that are going to make the purchase worth it, right? I mean, so it just is crazy to me that it's actually like that. So, how, like, because you did a really good job just kind of walking through that process. Maybe let's give your explanation of Agile, maybe a little bit of background on it, and like some of the functions of the operating system that you in the framework that you put together.
Yeah, sure. So when we look at Agile, we're looking at basically a project management framework that emphasizes responding to changes. So an easy way to think about Agile is adapting to what's actually happening as it occurs. And if you look at the traditional way of doing things, you tend to map everything out all up front and create this detailed plan. And then you basically follow the plan, which works when you know all the steps are there and you know what the end state looks like and everything's very predictable. For example, building a house. We can blueprint it and we know we don't want to change our plans and we're pretty fixed on what we're building here. But the challenge, and just like in the software world, is that you're building things with assumptions. And then as you continue through your plan and start getting feedback from users, you need to change your requirements. And there's a lot of fluctuations in your plan. M&A is very similar because when we start that deal, there's few people involved, but as we continue through diligence integration, more people get involved, more information comes in, and that means there's going to be new findings, issues, and things that come up, and that needs to be responded to. So that's probably the main fundamental difference when we look at following an agile project management approach versus the traditional approach.
Well, which is, I think you do a good job of explaining that too, because I mean, is there maybe for the listeners who are not familiar with the Agile framework, is is it based on principles, right? Because there's a certain amount of things that you want to get done, right? So there is, it's not a step by step, but there's a certain overall thesis of what you're trying to accomplish. So like, how are you getting that feedback? And maybe can you give an explanation in the software world, and then also maybe an explanation in the M&A world? Because I think I've got some friends that own software companies, and it's like all of a sudden a feature. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think they take like the core function of the code, and then they have different teams that are building stuff. Then they put it back together. They get feedback, and then so they're constantly having to change this stuff, but also communicate in a highly effective manner because they're working on different parts of the whole. How maybe I don't know, maybe re-explain what I said if I was off a little bit, but
Well, no, there's a couple of key points you're pointing out. I think when you talk about that process and the way you describe it, you're describing it to be very iterative, where
Hmm.
you're just able to continuously change things. So one of the real basic approaches to this is having this backlog. And I've done this and struggled managing a team, Ryan, where my biggest challenge was just getting everybody focused on the highest priority task at all times. And I think anybody who's managed a team could relate to that, where no matter how big or small, but just making sure everybody's working on the highest priority task throughout the project. And I remember having the Excel sheets and you start tagging things as high priority. And then
Everything's
next thing you know,
hybrid. Everything.
half the sheet's high priority and there's no clarity on this. And then it just becomes a big challenge, especially if your team's distributed. So and one of the things I learned from Agile is the backlog approach, which you consolidate all those lists as much as you can into a single list and you keep your tasks in a descending order of priority. So the most important item is always on the top of the list, followed by the next and the next. And this keeps that real level of clarity there in terms of what the priority stands. And then as you assign tasks to change a priority, you just simply reorder things, drag and drop it to the top if you need to escalate the priority, or shift things down if you need to de-escalate it. And that's worked really, really well in terms of having everybody on the same page, looking at the priorities in the order they need to happen. Only on the flip side of that is it does add a little bit of extra overhead to periodically go through and groom that list because things do get shuffled around. So as long as one person's responsible or a couple people are responsible to get together once a week or whatever it is, and just make sure there's that clear alignment on those priorities. But that I can see that with every team I've worked with since I learned that method has been highly effective in terms of managing priorities.
So how does that relate to M&A then? Maybe can you give us a couple examples of how that works, the different maybe roles and then the different things that they're reprioritizing?
Right. So during diligence integration, there's a bunch of tasks that happen, right? If we're going to get that same list of 300 requests, well, the truth of that request is there's probably about 10 to 15 things that really need to get done today.
Hmm.
And it's the most important things to push the deal forward. Some of the other stuff can come at some point, and then there's probably a lot of stuff that doesn't even need to be answered because somebody just took it on a template and didn't really take the time to go through stuff. So when you can prioritize these items, now you can just focus on getting those 10 to 15 most important things that need to get done today, send those off, and then
Hmm.
focus on the next highest priority items. Meanwhile, the other side can get those responses that they need to continue the process. And then they're able to actually respond back so that you're getting this shorter cycle to actually iterate faster on those key critical issues instead of waiting to answer 300 items, which may take 5 days, and then waiting for a bunch of responses to all come
Hmm.
back. And then the poor guy at the desk is just getting an avalanche of work every time this correspondence happens. In between, he has a bunch of dead time. So it's really creating a lot more efficiency by having these short cycles and a clear focus on what is the most important thing that needs to get done today.
Well, and like, yeah, you're right. And if you think about all the different departments from HR to accounting to finance to operations to sales to service, I mean, all these different department, core departments are going to have their own sets of checklists, like you said, which is kind of like that example in the software world where everybody's got their own. But then, what are you seeing of success when when you're talking about integration team being involved upfront as part of this, and then also who is like in a successful project like this, who's leading it, right? Because I've seen problems where like maybe corporate says, hey, we want to acquire this, and in public companies it could be for shareholder reasons, for private companies it could be because they need to acquire talent, they need to acquire customers, so there becomes a main business reason for purchasing a business, right? And then there is the financial necessity to get a return on that. So there's the core, foundational, purposes for the deal. But I see like, in the situation when you have either very few times there's buy side investment bankers, right? If there are, they're either on staff, but you have the buyers team and then you get the sellers team. Who's responsible for this overall project, to be managing something like this, and who is compensated correctly to make sure that the different departments are doing what they need to be doing? I mean, I'm curious on like what you've seen that is, what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, traditionally, they do put a head person for the deal. So in the corporate environment, their team may be led by VP of corporate development, but then there may be a director that's specifically leading that deal. And then there is some challenges in terms of comp and incentives around it, which I think is a big challenge because a lot of times they're not incentivized after the close. It's everything's tied to a structure to the close. The worst structures I've seen are tied to revenues on doing the transaction.
No,
But
who cares
you
about
know, and
profit?
yeah, I mean, we were just buying revenues, and that incentivizes actually doing the wrong type of deals. So that is a big challenge because ultimately you want to keep them. And again, I think this is a big trending thing that's happening now, where now it's those functions are combining together between corp dev integration, and you're seeing more people on the corp dev side involved throughout the transaction so that they're continuing through post close to stick with the deal so that it's not one of those things where they just pass it off and the shit's on the next person. They do got to take ownership of that plan that they created in that investment thesis to make sure it's carried out. But I think that's a couple things that are changing and need to change.
What are some of the things that people are doing to successfully get the integration team up front and be looking at stuff? I mean, what are the things that they're looking at?
Getting them involved early the best you can. I think we've seen this old culture of keeping them in the dark and up until a letter of intent is signed. And I understand from the corp dev's view where, or whoever's leading that corp dev role, that you don't want to waste resources. You don't want to say, hey, I'm going to start getting these people early, but their time is costing money. And if this deal doesn't go through, I'm not sure if it's going to go through or not. I don't have that level of certainty yet. So I'm going to refrain from bringing anybody integration side. But then we talked about earlier, if you can at least bring somebody on the leadership of integration and get them involved earlier, there's a lot of value in having them validate the actual value drivers early. Example is this: on my podcast, I interviewed John DeRusso from Cisco, who's one of the integration directors. And his answer when I asked him when he got involved in the deal caught me off guard because what he told me was that he gets involved before the corporate dev team has the first conversation with the management team of the target company, which is like far extreme on the other side that I've ever heard from anybody in integration. And his specific reason why was that as they're coming up with their investment thesis and determining the value drivers of the deal, he wants to be involved to be able to make sure those are things that he can actually deliver on.
Interesting. Well, yeah, because like I'm just trying to think, like, how do you then? What have you seen? Like maybe an example that he gave to prove that the acquisition was worth it. I mean, is there certain things, when you're looking at the integration team and understanding those value drivers? I mean, are there consistent value drivers? Are there consistent things that people are looking at? And how do you actually quantify whether the deal has successfully been integrated?
I guess it depends on each company, right? Because what are they buying the company for? Like, what is that specific value driver? Are they buying for the product? Or are they buying the technology, the people? Is it the market that they're looking to tap into? Is it more around purely consolidation in their industry or tapping into new geographies? So I think that when they really clarify that, which is really important, it's answering the why. Why are
Mhm.
we doing this deal and crystallizing that and creating that level of clarity, but making sure that continues throughout the deal because we talked about when we first started this, it's all these deals start off with this great vision of innovation, and by the time we hit day one, it's a big chaotic scramble and there's a lot of frustration, confusion, and things are blowing up. And that's the whole thing. Along with that story, there's the process piece that gets out of whack. A lot of times, that whole big picture vision gets lost as well, and everybody's caught up in doing a bunch of tactical crap instead of focusing on those real strategic value add activities that align and drive towards that big picture goal.
How are you taking, like, in this approach, and I don't know if you are or not, but like taking all the projects in due diligence and the different priorities and tasks, and then migrating those into ongoing project management once the deal is closed, like actually implementing, system transitions or migrations or people, and like how can you, like, do you have to restart all those projects, or are you able to take the discovery that's been done in due diligence and then actually make those into integration projects post closing?
No, you're pointing out a huge problem I've seen that when you have those separate teams, there tends to be this big knowledge chasm between diligence, the corp dev team, and integration. And that ends up leading to a bunch of rework. And you're handicapped because now you have to relearn a lot of things because you didn't get this knowledge ahead of time. And the better way to fundamentally think about integration as an extension of diligence. So they really should be a parallel process to plan your integration at the same time you're doing diligence, which is why it makes sense to have the integration leaders do the diligence and then develop that integration plan. Because I just had somebody ask on our website chat the other day for integration template, and the integration templates out there are crap because they're very, very basic things that just give you a sense of what to plan for. But the reality is you need to create a very tailored plan. And that a lot of the information can come from diligence as you're learning about their different systems and processes and things of that sort, because it's all those little details is what you're going to end up having to think about for your integration and plan around. So making sure that you're doing that in parallel with diligence and having it as a full-on extension of diligence to go right into integration. So it's one continuous process and not looked at as separate stages.
So what I find super interesting, Kisan, is like what you just said, and all this just makes so much common sense. But like, I mean, I'm curious with your tenure in this space, and especially in the bigger companies, like, is it just because comp plans are so effed up that like this doesn't happen? Because it's just ridiculous to me. Because I literally on the front cover of the Twin Cities Business Journal this last week, it was because Minnesota's got 17 public companies and how much debt they've acquired doing deals. And like I look at that and I go, well, you have a bunch of corporate people that are, comped on like little teeny silos of all this stuff. And it's all like, you have a lot of shenanigans getting played with the share price. And like, because, debt's cheaper than equity and all these different things. And you go like, does anybody really get comped or care about making any of this stuff work? I mean, it's like so mind-boggling to me when you realize that like so few people are comped on the whole thing, that it like to have these companies that are running on spreadsheets and get paid to just get the deal done is just, I don't know. I just kind of get like baffled by it.
The economics are different when you're public. I'm still learning it because as a private company, you know what's going on and you're accountable for those numbers because you're thinking in term financially. But
You have to.
you do, because at the end of the day, that's ideally what you're going to sell on. And you do the math and build around that. And you are, especially if you're a private owner, I mean, you're really determined to create that value and focus on it. When you're a public company, a lot of them evolve into these M&A machines where the integration in that process and the strategy and aligning all this stuff together after deals get done doesn't matter as much, because it's just get the deal done and get a press release out there and get a bump in our market cap. And it just becomes more about doing the deals. And it's just that the machine for doing the deals and just their perception of the market. As long as that market cap keeps growing, that triggers some growth on the share value as well. So that it's just different.
Well, yeah, it's not reality. I mean,
And
like
I think that's where you see a lot looser accountability when it comes to the way they're integrating companies on the public side.
right. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And like, and then not only that, but the shenanigans that I've learned about what they play once they close a deal, of like how they restructure things and they can write the restructuring off. Just like, I don't know. I mean, like you said, it becomes more about getting the deal done and versus actually making sure there's long-term value creation. So in the private sector, where do you mainly play? Is it private or public?
We probably do more public than private. I would say it's probably about 40% private, 60% public.
Okay. And so what are the main differences you see between the two as you're explaining your methodology?
When we work with private companies, a lot of times it's on the sell side. We're working with investment banks that are referring us in. And I think the challenge is the investment banking community, just to be frank, is a little bit more behind in terms of adopting today's techniques and trends alongside with the consultants and law firms. Whereas when we work with corporations that are public, they're typically on the buy side and they're doing several acquisitions throughout the year where that leadership is at least incentivized to develop a process or evolve a process. Whereas somebody that's selling a company, it's a one-time event, and there isn't this strong alignment to facilitate a higher level of efficiency on the sell side that I've personally seen. Whereas on the buy side, when you're doing multiple transactions, and in that case, you're integrating the 18 companies over a year span, ideally you have more at stake and you do want to do things to make them integrate better. So you're at least incentivized to look at some things and figure out, hey, what are some better ways that we can make this a smoother transaction? Because somebody in that process is hurting.
Right.
That's deal because somebody gets blamed when things go wrong. So you know what I mean. There's that clarity where, hey, we keep doing these deals, we can't keep doing it wrong. We got to do something better. So a lot of our clients are usually publicly traded. They're 1 to 10 billion market cap companies that are occasional acquirers becoming frequent acquirers, and then they're enduring that pain when they start scaling out their process.
Well, what I find interesting, based on some of the things that you said, is if you think about the sell side of investment bankers, and this applies honestly from every end of the marketplace, whether it's down to the brokers all the way up to the big public investment bankers that you're talking about. On the sell side, if you're an investment banker, and like I think in the mid market, people so yeah, it's a good thing if one banker does like 3 to 5 deals, and that's a lot for one banker. And then so depending on the shop and like how big they are, you'd have to train each seller each time on an agile process like this, right? Because they've never done it. They don't even know what due diligence is if they haven't been listening to a show like this or been researching. So like the amount of pain that they have to go through to just educate the seller, it's like, okay, is it worth it or is it not? Because I'm never going to work with these people again, right? There's no long-term accountability. So just get the deal done, and they get paid to get the deal done. And like what I've always said, Kison, is that like the seller, I think people are shocked how little, like how many corners are cut from an owner's perspective. Like if you think about it, a privately held business owner has not been able to cut corners ever, right? Because the market tells them that they can't. Versus when they go to a process like that, if they're not understanding this, then I think they'd be shocked of what they would probably see compared to like, they haven't had the ability to compare multiple investment bankers across each other because they haven't experienced multiple, right? And I interviewed this one guy who is in a large private equity firm, and he sold, but now he owns a PE firm. But he said, you know what? If you're the seller, you should literally do reverse due diligence on the buyer, because you should be asking them what they're going to do to integrate. And I think people would be shocked at how few people actually knew what they were going to do post closing.
I think that's becoming more of a consideration because I am seeing that trend changing where founder owners are definitely more attached to the business, where especially they developed it and they actually do care about the team and what their future looks like. So I'm seeing more of that as consideration when evaluating different potential buyers. To jump back on the banking side of it, I don't think the problem is with the taking the time to work with each person and show them agile stuff. I just think part of it's the culture and the incentivizing the bankers to create the efficiency. And the reason I probably didn't clarify this the first time is when they're doing a deal, they're usually comped on the success of the deal, right? Which is common. And when you're looking at like a mid-market bank, any of your, the KPMG Corp Finance or William Blair, Baird, those type of banks, what happens is they're getting comped off that overall deal structure. And there's not like that bottom line incentive around the net margins.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem I see in the bottom line is it's the associates and the VPs that are not trained on project management. These kids go to Ivy League schools, they go to the top institutions, they come out, they get trained on all the financial modeling, and they're responsible to manage complex M&A transaction that they haven't spent a single day getting trained on any formal project management methodology. That's a problem I see in the industry, and it's partly because of the culture and partly because the guys that run the deal teams aren't financially incentivized to improve that because they get paid on the gross sales. So they're sales folks that run around looking for engagements because that's what they're going to get paid on. None of the efficiencies on the other side, unless they own the firm, matter to them. So they're not really incentivized to drive those efficiencies. If that
Yeah, that's
clarifies a
super
little bit.
interesting. And no, yeah, you're very right. I mean, like, if you, yeah, I'd be curious on how many people actually been trained on project management. And if you think about it, if you go straight into investment banking, you don't have any working experience working on big teams to accomplish big projects, right? I mean, it's just, you're just essentially just trained on how to ask questions and not care about the system, right? I mean, like, interesting.
But, I just to be fair, I should rip on the consultants a little bit. I remember pitching to one of the consultants and showing them our model and how it could drive so much efficiency in the M&A process and save hundreds, if not thousands, of hours. And he goes through and says, "I love this. I see how it works. I have one problem with it. I bill for those inefficient hours." So
Isn't that, I know.
I have a quota. He told me I have a quota I have to meet every year, and whatever it is, 3 million, 5 millions of services he has to sell, that's going to count against me,
I mean, doesn't that just make you infuriated?
right? That's true. And things are changing, right? Because you're seeing a model of more, and the law firm, same thing. I had a law firm where the legal counsel lead told me they spend almost 30% of their time looking for documents. Well, he's like, well, wouldn't it be great to like remove 80% of that? I was like, well, no, because I bill for that.
It's so funny, Kison, as I was like a couple years ago, as we were evolving our business model, we were doing due diligence and stuff like that, regardless of what they wanted to sell. And then we realized that the sellers don't necessarily care about that as much unless they're like fairly close. And we were trying to get referrals from CPAs and attorneys and stuff like that. And they were like, well, that just eats into our margin. I'm like, I can't believe you're saying that you need a $350 an hour, and I'm in Minnesota, right? It could be more, looking for documents. Like, that's insane. And like, they're holding on to it close to the vest because of their incentives.
Yeah, it's tough. People aren't always out for the best interest.
So what is it like, as you're looking at this, what would be your ideal, like, what's your big why? What's your big ideal outcome that you want to change? Like, what would like mean success to you of like, okay, like, hey, this is working and things are changing?
I think evolving the industry. We've seen this in the software world because the way their teams were even structured, they'd always have all the back end programmers together and the front end programmers in another team, design, QA, so forth. And it was highly inefficient. It was very expensive, and just the results were terrible. And what it's evolved with Agile is really, and I really want to emphasize this, it's around the mindset to be very change oriented and developing these collaborative environments where you have much smaller cross functional teams. So now you had each of those little parts, your back end, front end, and they're all working together. And they're a small team are able to go off and develop their own software feature. And now that process has become highly efficient where it's so easy to start a tech company now. You can build a great product. It doesn't cost that much. And it's just evolved that whole nature of software development, which is propelling a lot of the technology that we see today. And I think M&A is just so far behind that it's 2020 and these billion-dollar deals are still getting done in Excel. They're not following a formal project management approach. And there's things that the software world we can learn from, and the software world's even learned from lean manufacturing and have adopted a lot of their techniques in that model. And if you look at the greatest innovation between manufacturing and software development, it was all around how they reinvented their process. So I think there's a huge opportunity with M&A because we're talking about the largest expenditure a company will ever make is acquiring another company. So if we look at that, I mean, there's huge opportunity to drive efficiencies if we're spending 5+% and a ton of time and we're seeing these disastrous results during integration without this proper level of alignment. The idea starts off good. It sounds like we had a great plan and things are going to be beautiful afterwards, but then it doesn't end up working that way. So I think there's just tons of opportunity to take these M&A events, which often turn into value destruction events, and realign them so that not only there's better outcomes, but there's also happier people along with it too.
And what I find is interesting, because I haven't spent a ton of time in public companies. Like, I think, and then a lot of the listeners being probably from the privately held sector here is like, you have to be using these tools, right? Because you have to be so competitive and nimble in order to continue to grow and evolve. I I'd be I bet you a lot of people would be shocked on how inefficient bigger companies are because it's so hard to change. Some small example is I heard that when the private equity firm bought Sun Country here in town, an airline, right, and literally an airline, they were like I talked to some people behind the scenes and they're like, it was run on spreadsheets. I'm just like, what? I mean, so like, I don't know. I don't know if it's just because it's the bigger companies and people don't have, I mean, it's just harder to adopt new systems or like, because I think sometimes it seems like a far away story because people in the lower market are, it's easier to pick up a tool that has been developed in the last couple of years because you just make the decision, you just start doing it yourself.
You got a really good point. It's hard to get people to change, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, change is really hard, and people hate it depending on where they're coming from because it's tribal knowledge and it's job protection.
Now, so this is interesting because we can share some thoughts on this because I know you're a change-oriented person in terms of your goals as well. And the one thing I've learned is the only way people will change is if you give them a compelling reason to change. And my approach on that has been focused on the discovery and understanding of their pain points and challenges, and to really get to that level where you can empathize with them and make a person feel felt about their pain points and challenges. So when I work with companies, the first thing I do is map out their process because I want to understand how's your team set up, where's corp dev, who they report to, where's integration, how they talk to each other. And then from there is to identify the key personas. And once I identify the key personas, ideally I like to do one-on-one conversations and have more of a qualitative interview to understand their pain points and challenges. And it's like the cliche ask Wi-Fi times to start getting to the root causes of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, bring everybody together, bring all the different personas together because they're working together as a team, whether they're on a single team or spread across teams, and have them in a roundtable setting and just bring up those problems because it always becomes an eye opener. People don't see or take the time to understand the other person's problems. And then once you do this, people start understanding, wow, that one thing I'm doing that's what I think is right is actually causing a lot of harm. And actually it avalanches on as the process continues. So getting them to realize that that's probably the first big step in invoking that change is by identifying what the real compelling reason is. And then from there, following the agile way is just prioritize it. So you know what is the biggest challenge you're looking to solve and put that in descending order. And then you can almost naturally start coming up with solutions for it and then prioritize the solutions you want to implement. And then from there, take that, whether it's techniques, tools, whatever it be, and start introducing it in your kickoff checklist. Because usually there's a checklist when you kick off these deals to start introducing to the team of the process and the goals, but incorporate it there just to get everybody on the same page early. And it could be the folks that may be part-time in the deal, like we mentioned. Some of those management teams, it's going to be a one-off process, but they can at least get familiar with what's going to happen in this one deal. But I think that's like the key thing is really honing in and getting everybody to understand why that reason is there to make this change.
So, with your resources, your podcast, your book, and stuff like that, given the fact that you've got a lot of stakeholders, right? You've got the seller, you got the buyer, you got the different advisors. If someone that's listening to this and you know what, I want to make I want to streamline our acquisition process, or I want to actually learn about this before I end up selling, because I think the only way to take ownership and make sure that this happens is you have to learn it, and then you have to, get other people on board. What are some of the resources and tools that you've got out there, and where can people find you?
That's good stuff. When I do a podcast called M&A Science, so that's always fun because I think it's really important for your audience, particularly, especially if they're more on the sell side, is to get a perspective on the buy side. So I do interview a lot of the corporate development practitioners, and it does give a very good view on the buy side. I like interviewing people on the integration side as well to get their perspective. So I think that's definitely helpful. In terms of learning about project management, I did publish the book Agile M&A. And we have a new website called agilema.com, which we publish a lot of free tools and templates. And I'm now creating an advisor directory.
Awesome.
Yeah, to get like the more of the project management. They're probably a little more geared towards the corporate world. And then we have a tool called DealRoom, which is dealroom.net. And that's a project management tool that we provide for both sellers and buyers.
I love it. And what's the best way to get in touch with you? Obviously, give a bunch of those if someone wanted to know more about you and one of those products.
Yeah, I'm available by email. Probably the best way to get a hold of me is Kison, spelled Kison, at Agile, AGILEMA.com.
Kison, this has been a blast, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you having me.